On this program, we do a lot of reporting about the world's problems, but we're premiering a new series about people coming up with creative solutions. It's called Agents of Change. This, our first installment, deals with a thought-provoking question. In this age of globalization and ever-increasing technology, is the notion of giving charity simply outdated? We went to the Pop Tech Conference, a gathering of some of the world's leading tech and social innovators, and met a young woman who's come up with a modern, and some say controversial, version of giving aid. Leila Janah has spent much of her adult life grappling with the question of how to eradicate extreme poverty. She's worked for several large aid institutions, including the World Bank. But today, she's part of a growing movement of social innovators trying to revolutionize the way aid is delivered to developing countries.
The number one thing people want in poverty is a job, and they'd much rather have that than some sort of handout. We have this idea that they don't have any skills to offer, and that they need a lot of training or investment in infrastructure before they can become productive. And I disagree so strongly with that.
Challenging the conventional wisdom about poverty is bold, especially so for someone still 2 years shy of 30. But that didn't stop her from quitting a lucrative consulting job to pursue her vision. In 2008, Janah moved to San Francisco and founded a nonprofit called Samasource. Instead of charity, she is bringing what she calls microwork, small digital tasks that can be done on a cheap computer, to those most often excluded from the global workforce: women, youth, and refugees.
We're building work allocation technology that can take a large spreadsheet and break it down into small units and then allocate those units to workers around the world.
She calls it a 21st century assembly line.
Where Google has found you the place.
Earlier this year, Janah was at a refugee camp in Kenya, training refugees from Somalia and Sudan to update addresses for Google Maps.
The location is in Minneapolis, MN.
Raise your hand if you speak English.
And after the earthquake in Haiti this year, Samasource hired workers to translate emergency messages from Creole to English for the U.S. government. In its first 2 years, Samasource has landed contracts with some of Silicon Valley's biggest players: Google, Facebook, Intuit, and LinkedIn.
My initial hypothesis was that businesses would be really attracted to us for our social mission, and they would be just like consumers. Consumers are willing to pay a 15% premium for socially labeled goods like fair trade coffee. Businesses, however, do not operate that way. And the procurement guy who's signing the contract with us really cares about three things. He cares about cost and quality and turnaround time. And if we're not competitive in all three of those dimensions, we're never going to get the contract.
And she has been competitive, inking $1.5 million in contracts in those first 2 years. Of the organization's total revenue, 30% covers operating costs, while 70% goes to paying workers. They are all doing small-scale digital tasks, a type of work that didn't exist 10 years ago, according to Janah.
I'm sure this is a criticism you get, that you're sort of perpetuating this outsourcing, and why is it something that should go overseas?
It's a great question. You know, I got my start doing social justice work in LA, and I feel an incredible, I feel a lot of empathy for people in this country who've become unemployed in the last few years. But the work that we do really wasn't ever done in the US. Much of the work that we do was never done before, period. It's new work.
And that new work is transforming lives in the developing world, particularly for young women, like 26-year-old Samsini Sarkar.
Here, the rules is women should get married only. No, can't get any job, can't do any job. This is the process. It's tough for women, really tough.
Sarkar lives in Calcutta, a sprawling metropolis of roughly 15 million people. Only about a third of Indian women have full-time employment, and on average, women make nearly 70% less than men. But through Samasource, Sarkar got training, then a job entering data for a financial news website that pays about $5 a day, significantly higher than the local average.
I got opportunity here to get the training, and after that, because Computer is like, you can call that passion, one type of. I just love computer, love.
She's representative of this rising class of young people who are trying to escape the slums through doing computer-based work. Women are traditionally not the group that gets computer-based jobs in poor areas.
So how did Leila Janah become interested in bringing jobs to women and youth in poor areas? In fact, her own parents left India in the 1970s in search of job opportunities. They immigrated to the U.S. and raised her in a working-class suburb of Los Angeles.
My knowledge of the developing world was limited to my parents telling me to eat all the food on my plate because there were starving kids back home, right? I just had no idea.
In high school, she won a scholarship and used it to teach English in Ghana to a class of 60. There she came face to face with the inequities of the developing world.
If you're a young person in Ghana, it's incredibly difficult to find a job. So you might be the next Einstein or the next Henry Ford, but in a country with absolutely no resources, it's just, it's incredibly difficult.
Janah is using technology and the power of the market to try to change all that, and her ideas are getting noticed. In March, Fast Company magazine named her one of the most influential women in technology. And at this year's Clinton Global Initiative meeting, New York Times columnist Thomas Friedman called her an inspiration to other young changemakers.
I had a chance to meet Leila, and we talked a bit about what Samasource was doing, the kind of social mission they had.
Rupesh Shah is the director of sustainability for Intuit, the multi-billion-dollar software company that produces Quicken and TurboTax. Last year, he signed a contract with Samasource to do a transcribing job in India, a job he says would have otherwise gone to a for-profit company overseas.
That transcription would have been done by a different supplier, but instead we chose Samasource because of their mission and their focus to give work to women, youth, and refugees.
Contracts like these make up half of Samasource's revenue. The other half comes from donations.
Correct? It's there. So is that one done?
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, next one.
Samasource now employs 900 workers on 3 continents with plans to scale up. But there are critics who say its expansion could have unintended consequences for the U.S. economy.
As you make other countries better at the things that you're good at, you can actually get poor.
Ron Hira is an associate professor of public policy at Rochester Institute of Technology. He says Samasource is well-intentioned, but that sending this work overseas comes at a cost to American workers.
I think one of the issues will be people taking away from it that this is all benign. That, in fact, a lot of offshoring is actually pretty bad for not only American workers, but also for the American economy. And even with Samasource, it'd be great to see them do these kinds of things in Detroit and other depressed areas in America.
But Leila Janah maintains the people she's employing aren't replacing U.S. workers.
We're talking about the lowest rung of the outsourcing work that even the big Indian outsourcing companies don't want anymore because it's priced too low for them.
And instead of asking why not us, she asks why not them.
To me, it just seems crazy that we should argue that we have any more of a right to work than a person who's grown up in absolute dire poverty. That argument just doesn't make sense to me.
Janah says she is looking into bringing work to rural areas here in the United States. Other companies have tried what's known as domestic outsourcing, but obstacles like low population in rural areas and limited internet access have made it difficult to scale up. In contrast, the developing world is now outpacing industrialized nations in internet expansion. That means Samasource can reach people like Prasenjit Baida, who lives in a rural area outside Calcutta, which until recently was off the grid.
My village is a poor village, very poor village. Most of people of my village is they are farmer and labor. And my father is also a farmer and he is a labor also.
22-year-old Baida earned a college degree, but had few job options when he graduated last year. Then Samasource opened a center here and offered him a job. He now makes $5 a day reviewing in-store videos for large retailers, collecting information about shoppers' buying patterns.
Now I am the main source of my family earning.
Baida is now also saving up for higher education, hoping to pursue a degree in mathematics.
In the next 30 years, more people will receive a formal education than in all of human history. And so we're dealing with this wealth of talent, and now we have to find ways to harness all of that.
As for Baida, he feels like his talents are now finally being realized.
My dream was a computer. Now I know the computer, and I'm doing the computer basic internet job. That's why it's very successful.